Girl, pull up a seat. No, for real, get your good chair, prop your feet up, and grab a cup of something warm, because the story I'm about to tell you, chilly. It is a testament to the fact that the devil works hard, but a woman who has been pushed to her absolute God-given limit works 1,000 times harder. This ain't just some idle gossip I heard through the grapevine. This is a lesson etched in stone and paid for with tears. This is the story of my dear, dear friend, Clara, and the day her own flesh and blood, the child she built a world for, tried to play her like a common fool. It all came to a head at the wedding of the century, they were calling it, and for once, the hype was real. It was held at the Grand Celestial Hotel, the most opulent, most expensive, most exclusive palace of a place in the entire city. Honey, when I say opulent, I need you to understand. We're talking chandeliers dripping with so many hand-cut crystals they look like frozen waterfalls, catching the light and throwing a million tiny rainbows across the room. We're talking Italian marble floors so polished and dark you could see your own soul staring back at you in them. The very air itself smelled rich, a heady perfume of money and lilies, and just a faint, sharp undertone of pure, unadulterated arrogance. And right there, tucked away from all that splendor, in a cold, sterile storage closet that smelled faintly of bleach and industrial-grade window cleaner, stood my Clara. Her only son, David, the boy she had raised with her own 2 hands, the center of her entire universe, was standing in front of her. He was dressed in a Tom Ford tuxedo that probably cost more than her first car. The lapels a sleek, offensive satin. The suit was perfect, but it looked wrong on him, like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He was sweating, a faint sheen on his forehead that had nothing to do with the temperature of the chilly room. But for all that money draped over his shoulders, he couldn't even look her in the eye. He was staring at a point just over her shoulder at a stack of folded tablecloths, his jaw tight, and in his hands he was holding a maid's uniform. Not just any uniform. It was the hotel's official staff attire. A plain black polyester dress with a stiff, starchy white apron. It was shapeless. It was soulless. It was an insult woven from cheap fabric, a garment designed for invisibility. Clara could feel the static cling coming off it from 2 feet away. It was the physical embodiment of being overlooked, of being serviced without a name or a face. He held it out to her, his hands trembling just a little, the crisp fabric rustling in the suffocating silence of that little room. The only sound was the hum of a distant ice machine and the frantic, rabbit-quick thumping of his own heart, which she could practically feel from where she stood. "Mom," he whispered, and his voice was so thin, so pathetic, it was like a stranger's. It was a boy's voice coming out of a man's mouth. "Mom, please just put this on." Clara just stared at it. Her mind couldn't make the connection. It was like he was speaking a foreign language, showing her an object from another dimension. She had come to the closet because he'd sent her a frantic text. "Need to talk before it starts. Meet me in the West Wing service closet. Urgent." She had assumed he had cold feet, that he was nervous and needed his mother to hold his hand and tell him everything was going to be all right. Just like she had before his first day of school, before his college entrance exams, before his first big job interview. She was prepared for tears, for anxiety. She was prepared to be his rock, as she had always been. She was not prepared for this. She was dressed to the nines, baby. She had on a custom-made St. John suit, a beautiful sapphire blue jacquard that shimmered under the single bare light bulb of the closet. She'd chosen the color to bring out her eyes, to project a quiet confidence, a maternal glow. On her feet were a pair of low, sensible, but very, very expensive Chanel pumps. Her salt and pepper hair was perfectly coiffed in an elegant chignon. She was the mother of the groom. She looked the part. She was the part. She had spent a lifetime earning the right to be this woman in this suit At this wedding, she finally found her voice, and it was laced with a deep, wounded confusion. David, what is this? Is this some kind of a joke? Because it isn't funny. The ceremony is about to start. And that's when he finally forced himself to look at her. And in his eyes, she didn't see her son. She didn't see the little boy who used to fall asleep in her arms with his thumb in his mouth, or the teenager she helped with his calculus homework until 2 a.m, or the young man she'd sent to the best university money could buy. She saw a stranger, a weak, terrified stranger, drowning in his own ambition. It's not a joke, Mom. He swallowed hard, a painful-looking motion in his throat. It's Vanessa and her family. Vanessa. The name hung in the air like poison, like a cheap, cloying perfume you couldn't get rid of. They think you're poor, he stammered, his gaze dropping to the scuffed concrete floor. He couldn't bear to see the hurt he was causing. They think you live in that little house, and, well, they don't understand. They're old money, Mom. Image is everything to them. It's just how they are. He said it as if it was a law of physics, unchangeable and absolute. He started to ramble, the words tumbling out in a shameful rush. It started small, you know. I didn't mean to lie. They asked where you worked, and I got nervous. They were talking about their mothers, chairing charity boards and running foundations, and I panicked. I just said you were in hospitality, and they just assumed. They assumed you were a worker, not an owner, and I didn't correct them. And the lie just got bigger and bigger, Mom. Clara's heart, which had been soaring with pride and a mother's joy just moments before, felt like it had been tied to an anchor and thrown into the deep sea. It plunged right through the polished marble floors, past the kitchens and the laundry rooms, and into the cold, dark foundation of the hotel. What are you saying, David? What does my house have to do with anything? It's the house you grew up in, the backyard where I taught you to throw a baseball. I told them you work for the hotel, he mumbled, the words shamefully quiet, absorbed by the drab walls of the closet. I told them you were on staff. It was just easier, Mom. It was just to get them off my back. Vanessa said it would be better this way. She said her parents are making a big investment in my new company, and we can't have any awkwardness. Please, don't embarrass me. Not today. Of all days, not today. Just wear the uniform, serve a few drinks, blend in, stay in the background. I'll pay you for your time. I promise. I'll make it up to you later. Pay her. He said he would pay her. The audacity, the absolute soul-crushing, heart-shattering audacity. Clara felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. The beautiful, expensive suit she was wearing suddenly felt like a clown costume. The Chanel pumps felt like lead weights. This man, this boy she had sacrificed every waking moment for, was asking her to erase herself, to become invisible, to be a servant at his wedding so he could impress a bunch of arrogant, vapid snobs who wouldn't know real class if it slapped them across their Botox faces. He was asking her to trade her dignity for his social standing. But before we get to what happened next, before the fire and the righteous fury, you have to understand who Clara is. You have to understand the sheer depth of this betrayal, the Grand Canyon of this disrespect. Clara wasn't born with a silver spoon, child. She was born with no spoon at all. In a town that the world had forgotten, she grew up with nothing but holes in her shoes and a fire in her belly that burned hotter than the sun. She became a single mother to David when she was just 20 years old. His father, a ghost who was gone before the ink on the birth certificate was dry. A sweet-talking boy who panicked at the first sign of responsibility. And let me tell you, that woman worked. She worked like the rent was due every single day, because it was. She cleaned other people's houses, scrubbing their toilets on her hands and knees, making their beds invisible. She remembered the specific smell of Murphy oil soap and ammonia, The ache in her lower back, the callus that formed on her right index finger from scrubbing. She waited tables at a greasy spoon diner, her feet aching and her back screaming, smiling through the exhaustion, all for a handful of tips she would count out on her kitchen table at night. She worked the front desk of a dingy little motel on the bad side of town, the kind of place where the carpets are permanently sticky and you learn not to ask questions about the noises you hear in the middle of the night. She did it all with a baby David, strapped to her back in a worn fabric carrier or sleeping in a playpen in the manager's office, the smell of stale cigarette smoke, his first lullaby. She remembered one night. David had a fever of 103, and she couldn't afford to miss her shift at the diner. She wrapped him in a blanket and laid him on a cot in the dry storage room, surrounded by giant cans of green beans, and she'd run back to check on him every 15 minutes, her heart in her throat, praying he was still breathing. She'd study during her 10-minute breaks, a textbook propped against the cash register. She saved every single penny, every quarter from a tip, every dime she found in a couch cushion. While other people were out living their lives, going to movies, buying new clothes, Clara was at home with a stack of secondhand business textbooks from the library, a highlighter in her hand, teaching herself about assets and liability, about profit and loss, about depreciation and amortization. The words were a new language, but she was a determined student. She saw them not as words, but as blueprints for a different life. And then one day, after years of scrimping and saving, of eating beans and rice so David could have chicken, she took all her money, and it wasn't much, honey, just a prayer and a pile of dog-eared hope tucked into a coffee can. And she walked into the bank. The loan officer, a man named Mr. Henderson, with a pitying smile and tired eyes, almost laughed her out of there. He saw a tired single mother in a worn-out coat. But then Clara laid out her business plan. It was so meticulous, so well-researched, it was a work of art. It had profit and loss projections for 5 years, a market analysis of the local trucking routes, a cost-benefit breakdown of switching to energy-efficient light bulbs. She had an answer for every question, a counter for every doubt. He had no choice but to listen. She got the loan, and she bought that same dingy little motel she used to work at, the Sleepy Hollow Motor Inn. She didn't hire a crew. She scrubbed it clean with her own 2 hands on her knees until her knuckles were raw and bleeding. She tore out the sticky carpets herself, hauling them to the dump in a borrowed pickup truck. She painted every wall, patched every hole. She planted marigolds out front because they were cheerful and hearty, just like her. She treated every single guest, whether it was a tired trucker or a family whose car broke down, like they were royalty staying at the Ritz. She'd put out fresh coffee and donuts in the morning, even though it came out of her own pocket. And it worked. Word got around. Go to the Hearthstone, they'd say after she'd rebranded it. It's clean, and the lady who runs it is nice. One motel turned into 2. The second one was a risk. She had to leverage the first one to get the loan, and she didn't sleep for 6 months. But her formula worked. 2 turned into 5. 5 turned into a respected regional chain of welcoming, affordable inns. She called them the Hearthstone Hotels because she wanted every location to feel like coming home, a warm and safe place in a cold world. But Clara didn't stop there. She was smart. Lord, she was brilliant. She took her profits and she invested. She diversified. She bought up commercial real estate when no one else wanted it. Plots of land near planned highway exits that no one else knew about. She played the stock market not like a gambler, but like a chess grandmaster, seeing 10 moves ahead. She read financial reports like they were novels. In over 40 years, my friend, my humble, quiet Clara, built an international empire from dust and determination. She was the anonymous sole owner and CEO of a global hospitality conglomerate. The Hearthstone Hotels were just a sentimental fraction of her vast portfolio. She owned 5-star all-inclusive resorts in the Maldives where the water was clearer than glass. She owned chic boutique hotels in the heart of Paris that charged $2,000 a night. And yes, just the day before, in a multi-billion-dollar deal, so secret that only a handful of lawyers and bankers on the entire planet knew about it, she had closed the deal to acquire the entire Grand Celestial Hotel Group, the very building she was standing in, smelling of bleach and the bitter acid of betrayal, was now hers. Every crystal on the chandeliers, every thread in the carpets, every bottle of champagne in the cellar, she owned it all. And her son David knew none of it. It was intentional. She'd made a conscious choice. She kept her life, her real life, completely separate. She lived in the same modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood that she'd bought 30 years ago. It was paid off. It was comfortable. It was home. She drove a 10-year-old Buick because it was reliable and it got her from A to B. She wanted David to be humble. She wanted him to learn the value of a dollar, the dignity of work, the importance of character over cash. She didn't want to raise some spoiled, entitled trust fund brat who didn't know the price of a gallon of milk. She gave him a world-class education. She made sure he never wanted for anything essential. But she made him get a summer job bagging groceries. She made him work for his luxuries. She thought she was teaching him character. Looking back now, maybe she just taught him how to be ashamed of his roots. Then came Vanessa von der Meer. Savan. Her family tree allegedly had more branches than a redwood forest, and they claimed to have come over on the Mayflower, or whatever convenient lie rich white people tell themselves to feel special. From the very first moment Clara met her, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Vanessa was all polite, brittle smiles and cold, empty eyes. She walked into Clara's warm, cozy home, a home filled with the smell of baking bread and love, and looked at the comfortable furniture, the walls filled with photos of David growing up, with a barely concealed sneer. "Oh, David, darling, your mother is just so quaint," she'd said, picking up a framed photo of a 5-year-old David at a pumpkin patch, his face smeared with chocolate. She held it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. At their first dinner together, Vanessa had looked at the silverware, a sturdy set of Oneida that Clara had been proud to buy. "Is this sterling? No? Oh, how charmingly rustic." Clara had spent 2 days cooking a meal full of David's childhood favorites: fried chicken, macaroni and cheese from scratch, collard greens. Vanessa pushed the food around her plate and said, "You must be so proud of David, Clara. He's really managed to rise above his circumstances, hasn't he?" The insult was aimed at Clara, but it landed on David, branding him as a project she had undertaken. Trifling. The girl was trifling to her very core. And David, my God, David just lapped it up like a thirsty puppy. He was so desperate for her approval, for her family's approval, he started changing the way he dressed, the way he talked. He traded his comfortable jeans for pressed chinos. He started dropping the AGs from the ends of his words. He started saying he was summer in the Hamptons and Winteringstadt. He became a stranger to his own mother, a pale, weak imitation of the vapid, blue-blooded world he so desperately wanted to join. Clara tried to warn him gently at first. She'd take his hand and say, "David, baby, make sure that girl loves you for you, not for who you're pretending to be." And he'd just laugh, a tight, nervous sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, Mom, you just don't get it. This is how things are done in their world. It's important." Clara saw the wedding for what it was, the final transaction. David was trading his soul for a permanent spot at their country club. And apparently, his own mother was the price of admission. So back in that suffocating storage closet with the cheap polyester uniform in David's outstretched hands, something inside Clara broke. It was the string that had held her heart together for 60 years, a string woven from sacrifice, unconditional love, and endless hope. It snapped. But when a strong woman like Clara breaks, she doesn't shatter into a million pieces. She sharpens into a weapon. She looked at the uniform. Then she looked at her son's pleading, pathetic face, and a cold, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the kind of calm that comes after the hurricane has passed, leaving nothing but wreckage and an eerie silence. All the warmth, all the love, all the pride, it all just evaporated. And in its place was ice, pure, hard, Arctic ice. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the stale air filling her lungs. "All right, David," she said, her voice eerily flat and devoid of all emotion. "If this is what you want." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply reached back and unzipped her beautiful St. John suit. She folded it neatly, reverently, like she was folding a flag from a fallen soldier, and placed it on a clean shelf. She took off her Chanel pumps and set them beside it. Then she took the maid's uniform from his stunned hands. The fabric was rough and synthetic against her skin. It smelled like defeat and chemicals. She pulled the dress over her head and tied the starchy, unforgiving apron around her waist. It was a perfect fit. Of course it was. In a way, she'd been wearing a uniform her whole life. The uniform of a mother. The uniform of a provider. The uniform of a woman who puts everyone else first. This was just one more. The last one she would ever wear for him. David let out a shaky sigh of relief, the fool. "Thank you, Mom. You don't know what this means to me. Just stay in the background, okay? I'll see you after." He scurried out of the closet like a rat fleeing a sinking ship, leaving his mother standing there alone in the dim light. Clara stood there for a full minute motionless, letting the cold of the room seep into her bones, letting it fortify the ice in her veins. She closed her eyes. She wasn't just a mother in a maid's uniform now. She was an actress, and she was about to give the performance of a lifetime. The strategy wasn't about planning some elaborate revenge. No, that was too simple. The strategy was about letting them build the gallows they would eventually hang from, plank by plank, nail by nail. Her silence, her compliance, that was the rope she was handing them. She walked out of that closet and into the grand ballroom, and the show began. The room was a glittering sea of pastel silks, bespoke suits, and the kind of jewelry that has its own security detail. The air was thick with the sound of tinkling, insincere laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Clara went to a service station, her face a blank canvas, and picked up a heavy silver tray laden with full glasses of bubbly. Her movements were precise, efficient, economical. She'd waited tables for years to feed the very boy who was now ashamed of her. It was like riding a bicycle. Her body remembered the servitude even if her mind had moved on. She moved through the crowd, a ghost in a black and white uniform. At first, no one paid her any mind. She was just part of the scenery, invisible as requested. But then, a few of Vanessa's relatives, a gaggle of women with faces so tight from plastic surgery they looked permanently surprised, noticed her. One of them, a woman named Bitsy, who was dripping in diamonds that looked as cold as her heart, pointed with her champagne flute. "Muffy, darling, look," she whispered, not nearly quiet enough. "Isn't that David's mother?" The other woman, Muffy, squinted through her bifocals. "I believe so." "Heavens! I thought he was exaggerating when he said she was simple. She's actually staff." "How dreadfully embarrassing for poor dear Vanessa," Bitsy tittered, having the help for a mother-in-law. "Still, it explains so much about David, doesn't it? That slight desperation." They giggled behind their manicured hands, their eyes full of a cruel, delicious pity. Clara heard every single word. She kept her face a perfect blank mask. She walked right up to them, extending the tray with a steady hand. "Champagne, ma'am." They took the glasses without even looking at her, already moving on to their next piece of gossip. Clara filed the insult away. It was another receipt for her growing collection. She continued her rounds. She served David's new father-in-law, a portly man named Arthur Vandermeer with a face as red as his bank statement, who barked at her to be quicker with the refills and didn't even say thank you. He snapped his fingers at her as she passed. She served Vanessa's mother, a skeletal woman named Eleanor in a hideous lavender dress, who looked down her long, sharp nose at Clara and said, "Do try not to spill anything. This is couture, you know." Clara just nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, ma'am." With every insult, with every condescending glance, with every dismissive wave of a hand, the ice in her veins got a little thicker, a little harder. She was no longer just playing a part. She was gathering ammunition. She was collecting the evidence for a trial that nobody but her knew was happening. The ceremony was about to start. The string quartet began to play something classical and important sounding. The guests began to take their seats in the rows of gold-gilded chairs. Clara stood near the back by a service entrance, holding her now empty tray. She saw David up at the altar, looking nervous and proud, fidgeting with his bow tie. He caught her eye for a split second across the vast room. He gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a quick flicker of acknowledgement as if to say, "Good job, Mom. Thanks for being invisible." That was the moment the ice in her heart, which had been a glacier, began to groan and crack under the pressure. Then came Vanessa. Oh, child Vanessa. She was a vision in white, if your vision was a $50,000 meringue, a Vera Wang gown so enormous with so many layers of tulle and silk, it looked like it was trying to eat her whole. Her face was a mask of smug satisfaction. She glided down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes fixed on David like he was a prize she had just won. But just as she was about to pass the back row where Clara stood, she spotted her. A flicker of pure, unadulterated annoyance crossed her perfect face. It was as if she couldn't stand the sight of this simple, working-class woman tainting her perfect, expensive day. She stopped. The music swelled. Every single person in the room was watching her. Vanessa beckoned Clara over with one long, perfectly manicured finger, a command, not an invitation. Clara walked toward her, her heart beating a slow, steady, dangerous rhythm against her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. My dress, Vanessa said, just loud enough for the people in the first few rows to hear, her voice a delicate, theatrical whisper. "The train is wrinkled from the walk. Fix it." It wasn't a request. It was an order, the kind you give to a dog. Clara looked at the acres of white silk pooled on the pristine marble floor. She looked at Vanessa's smug, expectant face. She looked over at her son, who was watching, his face frozen in a rictus of anxiety, but doing nothing, and she bent down, on her hands and knees in front of hundreds of people. The secret owner of this very hotel, the woman who could buy and sell everyone in that room 10 times over, knelt down to smooth the train of her son's bride's dress. The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like a hot, heavy blanket suffocating her. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her back. She could hear the whispers, the little titters of amusement. She smoothed the fabric with slow, deliberate movements. "There," she said, her voice low and tight. Vanessa looked down at her, a queen surveying a peasant. "Good girl." And then, as Clara started to stand up, her knees aching, Vanessa did something so calculated, so exquisitely cruel, it took everyone's breath away. She was holding a glass of red wine. She'd been sipping it before she started her walk down the aisle, a little something for her nerves, and she tripped. A tiny, delicate, utterly fake little stumble. The red wine arced through the air in a perfect ruby-red parabola and splashed all over the front of Clara's clean white apron. A collective gasp went through the room, sharp and sudden. The dark red liquid soaked into the fabric instantly. A blooming stain of shame right over Clara's heart. It looked like blood. Vanessa feigned shock, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, my goodness," she cried, her voice dripping with false sympathy that was as transparent as glass. "You clumsy old thing. You got in my way." She turned to her horrified mother in the front row. "Mother, did you see that? The help is so incompetent here. It's just unbelievable." Then she looked back down at Clara, who was still frozen on her knees. The mask of sweetness dropped and her eyes flashed with pure, unadulterated malice. She leaned down, hissed, her voice a venomous whisper only Clara could hear. "Clean it up and get out of my sight, you old hag." And that was it. That was the line. That was the point of no return. Clara stood there, slowly rising to her feet. The red wine dripped from her apron onto the pristine marble floor. Drip, drip, drip. The whispers in the room grew louder, more frantic. Her son, David, stood at the altar, his face pale as death, looking anywhere and everywhere but at his mother. He did nothing. He said nothing. He just let it happen. He let his bride-to-be humiliate his mother on her hands and knees in front of the world he was so desperate to join. In that moment of absolute degradation, with the smell of cheap wine and expensive perfume filling her nose, Clara felt something shift deep inside her soul. The glacier in her heart didn't just crack. It exploded. It detonated with the force of 1,000 broken promises. The cold, calculated calm was gone, vaporized by a fire so hot it could melt steel. She looked at the red stain on her apron. It was a badge of dishonor he had asked her to wear. She looked at Vanessa's triumphant smirk. She looked at her son's cowardly silence. And then, as if summoned by her righteous fury, the grand double doors to the ballroom burst open with a bang. It wasn't a late guest. It was the general manager of the Grand Celestial himself, a distinguished Frenchman named Jean-Pierre Dubois. And he did not look happy. In fact, he looked like he was having a heart attack. His face was white as a sheet. His eyes were wide with a terror that was almost comical. He was practically sprinting into the room, followed closely by two of his top security chiefs, both looking grim and confused. The string quartet screeched to a halt mid-note. Every head in the room turned to stare at the commotion. Mr. Dubois ignored the bride and groom at the altar. He ignored the stunned, whispering guests. His eyes were scanning the room frantically, like he was looking for a bomb or an assassin. Then he saw her. He saw Clara, standing there in her wine-stained maid's uniform, a figure of profound and silent rage. A look of pure, unadulterated horror washed over his face. He ran toward her, not walked, ran. He skidded to a halt right in front of her, his expensive Italian leather shoes squeaking on the marble. The entire room was dead silent. You could have heard a diamond drop. Vanessa, annoyed at this dramatic interruption of her grand entrance, snapped, "What is the meaning of this? Get this woman out of here and get back to your post. You are ruining my wedding." Mr. Dubois didn't even glance at her. His eyes were locked on Clara, his expression a mixture of terror and profound respect. And then, to the absolute jaw-dropping shock of every single person in that room, he bowed, a deep, formal, deferential bow from the waist, the kind of bow you give to a king or a queen. "Madam," he said, his voice trembling so hard you could hear it from the back row. "Madam Owner, forgive me, I was not informed you would be on the floor today. I just received the alert. Is everything to your satisfaction?" Let me tell you, niece, the silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was a vacuum. It sucked all the air, all the sound, all the smugness right out of that ballroom. "Madam Owner." The two words echoed in the cavernous space, ricocheting off the marble and crystal and landing like bombs. David's face went from pale to translucent. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, and that ghost was his own future dying. Vanessa's jaw dropped so far you could have parked a car in it. Her mother, Eliana, looked like she was about to faint into her couture. Clara looked at the terrified general manager. She gave him a small, tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were chips of obsidian, hard and glittering. "No, Jean-Pierre," she said, her voice clear and strong and carrying through the silent room like a bell. "As a matter of fact, everything is not to my satisfaction." Then she did something that nobody in that room will ever forget as long as they live. Slowly, deliberately, she reached behind her back and untied the strings of the stained white apron. She pulled it off and let it drop to the floor like a dead thing. Then, with the whole room watching, she unbuttoned the cheap black polyester dress and shrugged it off, letting it pool around her ankles on the marble. Underneath, she was wearing a simple, elegant black sheath dress she'd had the foresight to wear under the uniform. It was the kind of dress that screamed power, quiet, understated, but more commanding than Vanessa's ridiculous $50,000 meringue gown could ever hope to be. She stood there, transformed. The meek, clumsy maid was gone. In her place stood a titan, a queen, the owner. She straightened her shoulders and walked. She didn't scurry. She didn't rush. She strode. She strode past the gawking guests, past the horrified, pale-faced Vandermeer family, right up the center of the aisle. Her sensible heels clicked on the marble with a sound like a ticking clock, counting down the last seconds of their comfortable lives. She walked onto the altar, right next to the stunned priest, and took the microphone out of his limp, unresisting hand. She looked out at the sea of confused, shocked faces. She found David's eyes. He was shaking, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, mouthing the word "Mom" over and over again. She tapped the microphone. The soft thump, thump boomed through the speakers. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Clara May Thompson. I am David's mother." She paused, letting that sink in, letting them connect the woman in the power dress to the woman on her knees in the maid uniform. "I am also, as of 10 o'clock yesterday morning, the new owner of the entire Grand Celestial Hotel Group. This building," she said, making a small, sweeping gesture with her hand, "and everything in it belongs to me." A wave of gasps and frantic, hysterical whispers rippled through the crowd. It was a sound like fire catching in dry grass. Clara's eyes found Vanessa, who looked like she was about to be physically sick all over her Vera Wang. "I was so looking forward to celebrating my son's wedding today. I came here to be the proud mother of the groom. But it seems there was a misunderstanding. My son and his, fiancé," she said the word like it was something foul she'd scraped off the bottom of her shoe, "felt that my presence as I was an embarrassment. They asked me to pretend to be a member of the staff, to serve you drinks, to blend in, to clean up their messes." Her gaze hardened into daggers as she looked directly at Vanessa. "One of which is still on the floor, I believe." The humiliation was now flowing in the opposite direction. It was a tidal wave, and it was crashing right over Vanessa and her family, drowning them in their own snobbery. "I have always believed in humility," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength and volume with every word. "I have always believed in the dignity of hard work. I have cleaned toilets with my own hands, and I have chaired board meetings in the highest skyscrapers. I have never, for 1 second, believed that one job is more worthy of respect than another. A person's worth is in their character, not their title. But what I will not tolerate is being disrespected. I will not tolerate being humiliated, and I certainly will not tolerate it in my own house. And I will not ever tolerate my own son forgetting who he is and, more importantly, who raised him." She looked directly at David. The love was gone from her eyes. It had been burned away. All he could see now was the reflection of his own spectacular failure. "So I have 2 announcements to make this afternoon. First," she said, her voice dropping and becoming lethally quiet, forcing everyone to lean in, This wedding is canceled. Vanessa let out a strangled sob, a sound of pure agony. And second, Clara said, raising her voice again, a voice of pure command that filled every corner of the vast room, this party is over. I want every single one of you out of my hotel. Immediately. She turned to Mr. Dubois, who was still standing at attention, looking like he both feared and worshipped her. Jean-Pierre, please have your security team escort the Vandermeer family and Mr. David Thompson off the premises. They are to be permanently trespassed. They are no longer welcome here or in any of my properties anywhere in the world ever again. Then came the final blow. The kill shot, the one that shattered David's entire world into dust. Oh, and David, she said into the microphone, her voice utterly devoid of all emotion, as if she were firing an employee she barely knew. You were so concerned about your image, about money, about your prospects. Well, don't worry about them anymore. As of this moment, you are no longer my heir. You are cut out of my will. You are disowned. You wanted to impress your new family with your brilliant future. Well, honey, you no longer have one. You have exactly what you started with today. Nothing at all. She put the microphone down on the stand. The thud echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. And then absolute chaos erupted. Vanessa started screaming a raw, ugly animal sound. No, you can't do this. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is? Clara just looked at her with dead eyes. Yes, you're a guest who has overstayed her welcome. Security. The security team who had been standing by moved in. These were big men and they were not playing. David dropped to his knees, crawling toward the altar, begging. Mom, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I love you. Please, Mom. Please. But he wasn't talking to his mom anymore. He was talking to Madame Clara Maid Thompson, CEO, and she wasn't listening. She turned her back on him, on all of it, a final definitive act of severance, as security physically lifted a shrieking, flailing Vanessa and dragged her out of the ballroom. They hauled David, sobbing and pleading pathetically, right behind her, her family sputtering with impotent outrage and threatening lawsuits, was unceremoniously herded out with them like common riffraff. The guests, not wanting to be next, scrambled for the exits like their lives depended on it. A panicked stampede of silk and satin. Within 5 minutes, the grand ballroom, which had been the scene of the wedding of the century, was empty. It was silent, save for Clara, her loyal staff, and a massive, half-eaten wedding cake that stood like a monument to a spectacular disaster. Clara stood there for a long moment in the quiet, surrounded by the wreckage of her son's life. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She just felt a great aching emptiness, the space where her son used to be. And then, slowly, a sense of profound peace settled over her, a sense of freedom, the burden of David's ambition, the burden of her secret fortune. It was all gone. She was finally completely herself. The aftermath, child, it was a glow up for the ages. The story went viral, of course. It was everywhere. The Maid billionaire, they called her. The CEO who cleaned her own hotel. She became a legend overnight. And she didn't hide anymore. She stepped into the light and embraced her power. She graced the cover of Forbes magazine, not in a stuffy corporate suit, but in a beautiful, elegant sapphire blue dress, her warm, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. The headline read, "Character is the only true capital." She started a foundation, the Hearthstone Initiative, to help single mothers get education and start their own businesses. She poured all the love and energy she once gave to a son who didn't deserve it into thousands of women who did. And David, he got exactly what he wanted. He was a part of the Vandermeer family. For about a week, once they realized he was penniless, that the golden goose wasn't just dead but had never existed in the first place, they threw him out like yesterday's garbage. Vanessa left him in a storm of insults, calling him a liar and a fraud. Last I heard, he was working some dead-end sales job, living in a tiny apartment on the bad side of town, trying to pay off the mountain of debt he'd racked up trying to be someone he wasn't. Sometimes he calls Clara. He leaves long, rambling, tearful messages on her private voicemail. She never listens to them. She has her assistant delete them. She's too busy running her empire and changing the world, because that, baby, is what happens when you try to make a queen feel like a pawn. She doesn't just take your king. She flips the whole damn board over, sets it on fire, and walks away to build her own kingdom. And that, my dear, is what you call karma. And let me tell you, karma never, ever misses a payment.